Is it still in the morning? Good morning, sir.
Good morning, Chair.
Good morning, Mr. Sass. My name is this. It's up to you to pronounce it. Welcome to the panel, which is a committee on communication. In short, you have 10 minutes to tell us about yourself and as to why you have interest in the SABC board, meaning why did you apply for it? Surely you responded to the correct advert. But also, if you can, without members asking, tell us if there is something that can be a problem to us, conflict of interest and all that kind of thing. Putting that up front is quite important. We have a 5 minutes rule, so when you deal with questions, ensure that you are very succinct. Just answer questions, no stories. Thank you very much. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. I'm not going to try and pronounce, I'll just stick to Honourable Chair, and thanks to the members as well for inviting me. Members, you probably all have seen the CV, I presume. Well, definitely you have seen it. So you know my background. I believe I have a strong background in corporate governance and also in finance, and that I can be of assistance. I have applied for this position because I feel that I can bring some qualities to the board of the SABC. I have been in the past working in government in various sectors, notably in the last portion when I was in government was when I was the Accountant General. So I do have a strong background on finance, on governance, and those issues which I think will play a very important role at the SABC at the moment. But I also have experience in government. I understand how government works, I understand the finance, I understand the procurement process, I understand how HR works, I understand how systems work and the legislation, and I think a lot of the failures that we had in the SABC is because of shortage of knowledge in those specific areas, or maybe it was deliberately not applied. But certainly I think as a board member, it will be our duty as board members to have oversight over those things and make sure that the correct procedures are applied. I have long been involved in governance structures. I have served on various boards. I have served on various committees. I have experience in those matters, and therefore I believe I can apply those principles that I have learned to the SABC. And when you look at the SABC and some of the things that have been reported in the news, I think that is the important areas that we need to focus on. I have in my own mind set 3 objectives, which I think as a board member I should be looking at if I do get elected to serve on the board. These things are governance, it's the finances, and it's also the staff morale. I don't know which of these 3 are more important. I think that all of them are equally important, Chair. The governance must improve. We know that there's failings in the SABC that has been pointed out in the past, certain decisions that has been taken by people that should not have been taken on that level. Certainly the board should have had oversight over certain of these aspects which they have not correctly applied. I think as a board we will need to take accountability. Consequence management would be very important. We need to take action against people that have not done the right things. And we must make sure that controls are put in place to make sure that these things never happen again. And can I just maybe say that the decisions that has been taken in the past might have been with good intentions, I don't know, but it's the execution of those things that we need to look at. We have to understand the impact of our action before we take those actions. So we might take an ideological view to say 90% of all the content that we broadcast must be local content, and that's a fantastic view for us as a country. But the implications of that we need to understand, because the implications might be that the funding for the SABC runs out. And it's those consequences that we need to understand before we take any decision that could impact on us. I think it would be vital for any board member to take charge of the finances of the organization. If reports that has been circulated in public media is correct in the newspapers about the financial health of the SABC, then drastic action needs to be taken very quickly. In my time as the Accountant General, I was responsible for implementing cost containment measures. It didn't always make me popular with yourselves, I presume, and some of the other departments. But when you're in a situation like this, you have to take drastic action. And I believe I can assist in doing those kind of things. And then I think it's very important for the staff of the SABC to understand that they must have the freedom to speak out about things that they believe is wrong. It's very important that management must place trust in the people that does the work, because they are the people that's closest to the coalface. They understand what they're doing. And I believe that we can assist as a board to improve the morale of the staff in that way by showing that we value what they do and that we stand behind them. Chair, you ask about things that might impact on my appointment. I'm not, if you look at the definition of a director, I don't have any of those things.
Thank you very much.
That stands against me.
Thank you.
Thanks. Chair, but I do want to mention that there was
no. We're still going to continue with the interview. Honorable Kalago.
Morning, Mr. Sass. Just briefly list, just for me or for us, the legislative framework that governs the SABC operations and function. And also, you list various codes which also contribute towards making sure that there is a proper governance and running of things in the SABC. Also, besides that, if you can just mention, I don't want you to go into detail with to those documents or those. Also, the internal arrangements, which also are stipulated in some documents which have been adopted and went through processes, which helps SABC to operate. So just those.
Thank you, Honourable Member. I think the most important legislation would obviously be the Communications Act, and then certain acts like the Companies Act, the PFMA, and those acts that interacts directly on the SABC. And codes would be things like the King Code of Good Corporate Governance and issues relating to that. But there's also, internally, there would be codes that the SABC have adopted, their own code of ethics and processes that must be followed. Internal arrangements, various charters, again, as I say, I think for me it would be mostly be the internal procedures that they have adopted. There is certain codes in terms of, is it ICASA, that put rules down through the act that they legislate. But there's also things like the Treasury regulations that amplify that, and from time to time National Treasury would issue, and other institutions like the Presidency would issue guidelines as to what people must do. Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation will look at the key performance areas of the top management and the organization itself as well, to see whether they produce what they are supposed to do with the money that has been allocated to them.
Just maybe you'll clarify us. Here I have some sort of summary information. Have you worked for or you were working for the Treasury, what position you came, or are you still working for it? You'll answer that. Then, are you aware of the company called Bids Technologies trading as Abacus Advisory, which is alleged to have lucrative contracts with Treasury? I think one of your partners who actually who's a managing partner in the company is alleged she once worked in the office of or was a consultant in the office of the former Director General Lungisa Fuzile of the Treasury. And it is alleged also, it is from there that this company, which is alleged you are associated with, you'll explain to us, received a lucrative contract. So can you explain that so that we are clear of your involvement in that particular company? Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. That was the portion that I wanted to add when Chair gave me chance for the opening remarks, was to talk about that aspect. There has been, I did work for the Treasury. I left about 2 years ago. I was the Accountant General. Underneath my portfolio was the implementation of a new IT system for government, the IFMS, Integrated Financial Management System, which basically would have replaced the old legacy systems, which was BAS, Pacel, Logos, etc., which deals with HR, finance, and supply chain. There was a company called Bids Technology that was appointed, that did work for us. It trades as Abacus, Abacus Consulting is the trading name of it. And indeed, I do know the managing director. A report about that process has been issued. There's an internal audit report, as you know, that has been circulated. There's also a forensic audit that has been done about the whole process. The forensic audit has not yet been published, but anecdotally there were some reports in the newspapers about that. What is important is that the DG, the current DG of National Treasury, has stated categorically to the staff that no evidence of fraud has been found as far as that is concerned. It is true that this company did have a lucrative contract, but the correct procedures were followed in appointing them. The fact that they made a lot of money in itself is not bad. And indeed, one of the reasons I think I would like to serve on the board of the SABC is to make sure that fake news like this is not created. You might recall, I don't know how many of the members watch ANN7, but they had this report which they produced for about a week long where they commented on it. Now, one of the things, whether you agree with the report or not, you know, that's a separate issue. But the panel discussion was about white monopoly capitalism, which was the topic of interest at the time. And that's fine, but there's nowhere in the report, nowhere in any of the reports, in any of the reviews that has been done, was there any mention of white monopoly capitalists. And they were talking about this specific company, that's why I mentioned it. While they were talking about contracts that has been awarded to white monopoly capitalist companies, they put a picture of the owner of this company up there. And if you've seen it, he's a male of Indian South African descent. Now, how can that be white monopoly capitalist if he's a male of Indian South African descent? It doesn't make sense to me. What I can say to the member is, there is a report, and if we have done wrong, we have to take accountability. I believe I'm an honorable man. I will not shy away from my responsibility. But up to now, there is no evidence of anything being wrong. And if I have time, Chair, I would like, and maybe if there's no time, I would gladly engage with any of the members on that report at any time and explain what we've done. If it's wrong, I have to account. You know, I cannot run away from my responsibility. But we, and certainly myself, believe that nothing has been done illegally. If the procedures is not right, then we must account. What I would not do, Chair, I must just say that I will not let the reputation of honorable men be tarnished. People like the Director General at the time, Mr. Lungisa Fuzile.
Thank you very much. Honorable Machoba.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Sass. You applied to become a board member of the South African Broadcasting Corporation, and you are aware that is a state broadcaster. Now, I want you to tell us as a committee and the nation and the parliament as well.
You mean a public broadcaster, not state broadcaster?
States, oh, not fine. The board has 4 primary responsibilities. If you will be selected as a board, the one is to project a strategic direction. 2 is to project the international direction. What is the next primary responsibilities for the board? Lastly, Chair, a direct question to the candidate. If you should be the best candidate to be selected, do you think you will be a part of the staff, or you will be the director of the SABC to the staff? You know why I'm asking Chair this question? The SABC was not conducive in 2016. The broadcaster was disrupted by the members of the board, some of the members of the board. But I want you to tell us, if you will be selected, you will make sure that, tell us just a few words, you will make sure that the image and the dignity of the SABC will remain. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. If I might start with the last part, Honourable Member, as I said before, I come from I'm older maybe as some of the other candidates. I come from an old school. I believe I'm an honourable man. We must do what's right. That's why I told Member Kalako that if I'm guilty of anything, I must take responsibility for what I've done, and I won't shrink away from that. It is important, first of all, to project the right image of the SABC, as Member has correctly said. It is very important that it must be seen as impartial and correctly. And therefore, if I'm not the right person, you don't even have to worry about it. I promise you I will step down myself, because that's the right thing to do. That doesn't mean I don't believe I've got the capabilities and the right skills to make a difference. And it is important, because when people look at the board, they must also have confidence to say, this board is going to take the SABC forward, and I'm comfortable with the people that's there. And I must just say that the current members that serves, I think, is doing a fantastic job, and it would be great to work with them. As far as it comes as to the duties, the strategic direction and the international junction and those things, the member is correct. I think for me, myself, the more important thing is the immediate things that must be done. The fact of the matter is, if I read the reports correctly, the SABC is bankrupt. It's very nice to have all these lofty ideals about what we want to achieve, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't have money, you can't achieve that. And the first thing is to turn it around. That means that there must be cost containment, there must be drastic measures to cut, there must be consequences, there must be action taken against people that has not done what they were supposed to have done. And that would be my immediate focus. First, change the ship. You know, it's a big ship, SABC. You've got to turn it around. First, we must do that. Then we can look at other things. And it's great to have, to take the responsibilities further outside and those kind of things. We have other responsibilities as board members. We must look at the remuneration and the audit committees, the ethics and all of those things as well. And all of them are very important, and I can promise you I'm going to implement those things. However, for me, the most immediate thing is just to make sure that this organization is on the right track, and that you achieve by having good corporate governance, and you must turn the finances around, and then also the staff morale, as I said earlier. Thanks, Ma'am.
Thank you very much, Honorable Van Dam.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for making yourself available, Mr. Sass. I think you have a very impressive CV. You're a CA and you've got lots of experience, audit experience in the private and the public sector. You were the Accountant General of South Africa. The question I've asked a lot of candidates this morning is why the SABC? And the reason I ask this question is so that I can gauge whether or not candidates understand what they're getting into, understand the amount of work that's required at the SABC, and really just to understand why they want to serve on the SABC board. So what are your reasons for applying for the SABC board? What is it that you think you can contribute?
Thanks, Member Van Dam. I believe, I like a challenge. I can't do a job where you just sit down. And if it was a well-run organization, I probably would not have applied because, I believe I've got the ability to change things around, and I would like to do that. It's not easy. The member has heard already today things that have happened in the past were brought up because we live in a difficult environment when you work in government or as a state-owned company. You've got to be prepared for those things. It's always going to come up, but you must be ready to account for what you've done and why you've done these things. It is a challenge, I don't think I will shrink away. In the position that I was in previously as Accountant General, you would have ministers coming down on you and saying, why is this happening and this happening? And you've got to be firm. And therefore, I believe that I will not be intimidated like some of the other members might. Well, I'm not saying they will be, but they might be more junior and more susceptible to those kind of reactions. I'm used to those kind of things. Doesn't mean I like them. It's not easy, but I accept them as part of the job. And the big thing for me is the challenge. Like I say, if it was a well-run organization, it would not be a challenge, and I wouldn't necessarily have applied for it.
Thanks. And your stint at National Treasury was relatively short. You worked there for 2 years. Why did you only work for such a short time, and why did you leave in September 2015? So you served under the former DG, Mr. Fuzile, and the former Minister of Finance, Nhlanhla Nene. So what were your reasons for leaving in September 2015?
Remember, if it was up to me, I would go back tomorrow because I really enjoyed my job. It's a fantastic job, especially for somebody that crave responsibility. Unfortunately, my dad became very ill. He had cancer, wherein he was the first close family member of mine. I suppose I've overreacted. I've spoken to the minister at the time. We needed money to pay. When you're in a situation like that, we wanted to send him for treatment in India because we heard they've got progressive systems and all of those kind of things. Unfortunately, he died almost immediately. So, if I could, I would go back in a flash.
Thanks, and sorry for your loss. And then my final question is, given all your finance and audit experience, the SABC is in a bit of a dwang. And so how would you improve the SABC's finances, given the amount of knowledge and experience you have? How would you improve the SABC's funding model?
Well, there's a number of ways that you can do. We must be careful not to criticize everything that people have done. We must just look at the way it was done. So selling programs, for example, is not bad. I flicked on the channel the other day and I got on some of these old SABC programs that they're rebroadcasting on Mnet. I saw something called Telefon Quiz. I looked at it for about 30 seconds and I turned it off. Nobody wants to watch that. It's outdated. So if I can sell that to somebody and get money for it, hey, no problem, I will do that. But the most important thing is, first of all, get advertising back. You know, if we say we're a public broadcaster, we want everybody to have access, then I don't think we should even be levying license fees. For me, that's a personal opinion, although the legislation say, and therefore I will try and enforce it. But the most important thing is to get advertising space back. You do that by increasing the right content that people would feel that they want to advertise on this program. So it must be something that's of value to the advertiser, and that will draw the masses to look at the program or to listen to the program on the radio. Also, cost containment, Chair, I think is very important. I think there's certainly areas where we can cut cost at the SABC at the moment when I look at the financial statements.
Thank you very much. Another one? Time up. Yes, Mr. Davis.
Thank you, Chair. As I've done before, I'll ask all my questions in succession. I have 3 questions. Thank you very much, firstly, for making yourself available to us. In your CV, you say that you have, and I quote, a close working relationship with most senior government officials. Now, I think some people might say that many of the SABC's problems have been occasioned by the fact that too many board members, both executive and non-executive, are too close to government. What is your response to this? And don't you agree that we need an SABC board that is independent from government and government officials? The second question is, when you were at Treasury, did you ever come across any evidence of state capture? And what would you do as an SABC board member to protect the SABC from state capture in the future? And then my third question revolves around the finances of the SABC, and you've already mentioned that you would implement a range of cost containment measures, but you don't say precisely what those measures would be. I'd be very interested to know precisely which cost containment measures you would implement and how specifically you would implement them and still carry out the SABC's public service mandate. Because obviously the SABC has a very specific mandate as a public broadcaster which needs to be funded. So how would you balance the two, the cost containment, while still carrying out that mandate as set out in the Constitution and in legislation?
Thanks, Member Davis. If I can start with the working relationship, it's exactly that. When I say close working relationship, it means I know them on a personal level. It doesn't mean that we fraternize or anything like that. And I can tell you, while I think most of them respect me because I had to take certain stances in the past, that doesn't mean that they like me, because typically the decisions that I've taken would not have been those decisions that they necessarily would have wanted. So I'm quite comfortable that the close working relationship is something that means I have access to them rather than I have personal relationship with them that will influence the work that I do. I think in my case, I believe my past history reflect that I have not succumbed to any of those notions that you must abide by what these people necessarily want. As far as state capture is concerned, Chair, you've got to guide me on this. I don't know how much I am allowed to disclose about the things that we have at Treasury, because obviously it's confidential and top secret and those kind of things. I'm quite happy to share with you the things that I've done. One of the units that fell under me as the Accountant General was a unit called Special Audit Services, which is basically a forensic arm that investigated a lot of things. You know, we've investigated things like the chairperson of the IEC, the dairy farm in the Free State and those kind of things. So I have intimate knowledge of things that I believe, we've never called it state capture. We simply look at whether the process was right or wrong. But I don't want to comment about those things necessarily, you know, because I don't know whether I have the right to comment about those things. But certainly we've never called it state capture, but we certainly picked up things that were wrong. Or that we believed could have been done better, and which we have reported to the various institutions that deals with those matters. As far as the cost containment and the mandate, etc., you know, it's difficult because you judge an organization based on the public information that is available, and in this case it's the financial statements that were produced, etc., and anecdotal information that were given out there. but first of all, I think for me, cost containment start with the small things. You start small, and then it will, because once the culture is installed, it will grow. So things like the things that we have implemented at National Treasury, at national and provincial departments, no more entertainment, no more traveling when it's not really, really necessary. I believe, in fact, in my judgment, and I might be completely wrong, but it's my view, is that the SABC is overstaffed for what they are doing currently. I'm not saying they must be retrenched. I think people must be reskilled and reapplied into other areas, and we might get better benefit out of them if we do those kind of things. So I would start, if I am elected as a board member, I would start by looking at the organization as a whole, making sure, because over a period of time, if you're not closely focused all the time, you might lose focus, you might find duplication of effort, you might find that, let's call it, power is centralized in one position when it should rather be decentralized on a regional basis. Those kind of things is what I would like to focus on, and I believe that's where I can cut the most cost. But there are
Thank
other
you very
things.
much. Thank you very much. Honorable Madisha.
Yeah, thanks. Perhaps if one does go back, you'll understand, sir, because one has not understood some of the issues that you have raised. So, number one, I want to emphasize that from where one sits, it is correct, at least, to juxtapose, integrity with trust. It's extremely important, particularly when we talk about the realm in which the SAB is at the moment, SABC, okay? Now, I'm sure that you will agree that integrity is an important characteristic of any prospective board member. Now, in this regard, I note that you were involved in what is now the integrated financial management system. You did talk a little bit about that, albeit you have not, in my own opinion, finalized that, okay? You looked into the upgrade of the National Treasury, of that particular area in the National Treasury. Now, would you care to comment and place the controversy which, in my own opinion, you went through regarding this matter, of course, in perspective? Now, if the chairperson allows me, so that I don't come back, I'll put the second question. Okay. Could you describe, sir, in your view, okay, the relationship between the board, the shareholder, I suppose you know who the shareholder is, okay, and the SABC and its management. I suppose you know that the SABC has failed. I'm referring to the management in particular, but the board as well. If this committee says you should go in, are you going to be able to handle all those problems that we have raised? Thank you, sir.
Thank you, member. And it's a pity, that since the controversy about the IFMS came about, and it's been around for quite a while now, the only people that has approached me was, I had an informal talk with the DDG of Corporate Services about a year and a half ago, where we spoke about a number of issues, including the IFMS and what we would have done better if we had a second chance. And the investigators of the firm that were doing the forensic audit that spoke to me, and nobody else has bothered to speak to me about it. But what I can tell you is that there is an internal audit report, and it's a valid report. There are control weaknesses, and we have to account for it, including myself. There are things that could have been done better. What is not there, there's no fraud, there's no dishonesty or anything like that. What we have done has always been done open. And let me just explain one example of what happened. You know that we have the Office of the Chief Procurement Officer, which was only started a couple of years ago. One of the things they implemented is something called the Central Supplier Database, which puts all the suppliers together and stuff. if I can relate it to the SABC, it's like having an IT division and having a procurement division. And the procurement division say, I must buy a new system. The IT division then say, well, we're busy with a new system that will encompass the whole company. Whatever you want must be part of our system. So procurement don't mind, they just want the system. And this is what happened here. So what the internal audit report found, for example, is that the procedure should have been that the money for that system that they wanted should have been transferred to that unit, and it should be bought from their unit and not from this unit. Whereas we said, well, the whole system belongs to IFMS. Everything relating to IT must be part of IFMS, and therefore it must be included in what we say. There's nothing wrong with the procurement process that was followed in appointing people. There's nothing wrong with the money being apportioned. It's an administrative thing that the budget should have been transferred from one unit to another unit before it was done. I admit it was wrong, but no money has been lost to state or government. No process were flaunted, nothing like that. So I believe, just in short, member, it is correct. There is controversy and there is things that has gone wrong. You know, there's no denying that, and I'm part of that. And I will own up to it, and whatever consequences there is, I will face those consequences. But I believe in my heart there's nothing
15
irregular.
seconds. 15 seconds.
Chair, just on the SABC management, the shareholder is the number one, because the shareholder is the one that owns the organization. The board must give strategic direction, and we will, because we got the expertise to allow to guide management as to what they should do. Management is responsible for day-to-day activities, but I believe the board should guide them, but with the input of the shareholder, because the shareholder remains the shareholder and the owner of the organization.
Honorable Tolashe.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson. Good morning or good afternoon, Mr. Sass. Sir, appreciating the knowledge that you have in governance, can you please take us through on the issues that the pieces of legislation that governs the SABC? And please talk to them just summarily so that I can get to understand even more further that we really understand. Secondly, sir, you would know for a fact that this process is informed by the fact that the board was at some point disbanded. A new interim board was put in place, informed by a certain committee in Parliament that also made some recommendations. So as a person, how can you bring some kind of turnaround strategy informed specifically by the report of the ad hoc? Lastly, what process is taking place at the present moment in the SABC that takes into consideration the issue of hearing from the people? What is that process that is unfolding at the moment? Thank you.
Chair, can I just ask the very first portion, if member could repeat it? I missed that. The very first question, is it about the legislation that member asked? Chair, as I said earlier, there's a number of legislation that obviously impacts on the SABC, and all of them are important. Legislation is there to give us guidance, and it will help us in performing our duties. It's not supposed to be restrictive. It's actually there to guide us to make sure that we do the right things. I don't believe the legislation is wrong. I believe it's only things like the what is best for the country going forward in terms of technology, for example, whether we should be analog, digital. We've taken a decision already. It's just a matter of implementing those kind of things that is important, and legislating that so that we do it in the right way. But more important is let's call it the administrative legislation that guides the processes that we follow. For example, the PFMA and other legislation which deals with finances and the way that we account and how we account to those things. I believe I have a very sound knowledge of those specific areas. The Communications Act, I'm not an expert in. I don't know much about that. I can get the knowledge. But the PFMA, I believe I've got very strong knowledge, and the various codes, etc., that legislate that. And there I think I can say, when it comes to the turnaround strategy, and the report that has been issued, from anecdotally, from what I've read in the newspaper and public media and social media about the current board, the interim board, I think they're doing a fantastic job. And if I were unsuccessful and you tell me it's because we've chosen the current interim board, there's no question about that. They're doing a very good job. It is important because a number of reports have been issued and a number of statements has been made by various people about the SABC and what they have achieved, including the oversight that has been done by the shareholder in this case and the board itself at the time. In my mind, the board, the old board, did not perform the duties that they were supposed to do. They were delinquent in what they were doing because there are certain issues that should have been picked up if you were in that position, and it should have been highlighted to you. My turnaround strategy, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it's important. One, governance must come back. You must put rules in place and everybody must apply to that. And if somebody do not comply with those rules, there must be consequences. Action must be taken. And I think that's the most important. Once you made an example of somebody, I think it will turn around. It will be much better than that. The second thing, and I know I'm repeating myself, but the finances at the moment is very important. We have to look at the finance. We've got to make sure that it's a sustainable business. We don't want another SAA where we just pour money, and in the end we have to sell other government assets that's performing well to fund the SABC. SABC is very important. We can never do away with it. It is so important for all the members of our community and our country to have access to the SABC. That's why, in my own view, and I don't want to oppose it, but in my own view, we shouldn't even have license fees because that is a barrier to some of our people that makes that they can't have it. It's very important for us to communicate with our population, with the public out there, and the SABC is the way to do it. And therefore, we must make sure that the public responsibility that we have as a SABC gets pronounced and is processed out there. The process of doing it, I think I've touched on, Chair. Have I answered you adequately, member? Or do I need to expand on the process?
It's not about that. It's about communicating to us what the member asked. If you are done, are you done?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you very much. Honorable Tsedi.
Afternoon, Mr. Sass. I think you tried in a way while you were responding to the other questions to make my task much easier now. But I want you to try and share with us your view around the relationship between the SABC and the regulator. The current state of affairs, and if appointed a board member, how do you see yourself improving this current state of affairs?
So are all your questions asked? Are you done with your questions? With your questions? Okay, thank you very much. No, don't go to all questions. It's wise to do that.
Okay.
For our time.
The funding model for the SABC and the regulator, and what mechanism will you put in place to ensure that this funding model is realized? If you can just share with us as well.
Thanks, member. First of all, the relationship between the regulator and the SABC, I believe, is strained at the moment. In my view, I mean, one of the things of a board member is to make sure is relationship management. We have to, while being firm about what we believe in and what we stand for and what we must comply with in terms of legislation, we have to have a cordial relationship with all our stakeholders, including our regulator. The regulator especially is very important because it's got an oversight responsibility, just like the members have in the portfolio committee. But the regulator is there to make sure that we comply with the legislation that has been put down. That regulator implies they must regulate. And if we are not doing what they expect us to do, then there's a problem. And that, as a board member, we have to address. Now, that might not mean that we are wrong, but it might mean that the perception that the regulator have about us is wrong. And the only way to change that perception is to give them the correct evidence. And if you produce evidence and they still do not believe you or you cannot convince them, then you have to accept that you're probably wrong and you have to change your view. But at the end of the day, the regulator applies legislation. And therefore, if they say that we must do something, we have to comply with that. It doesn't mean that we're always going to like it, but it does mean that we must have cordial relationship with them. I'm a very I'm very strongly of the view that people can be convinced if you have the facts at your disposal. So it doesn't mean that simply because the regulators say we have to do something, we must immediately do it. I think there's room for engagement and explaining our position to them. But at the end of the day, once the decision is taken by the regulator, I believe it's up to the board to make sure that it is implemented. It must be implemented without question, because that's the role of the regulator, I believe. The funding model, as I say, for me personally, the funding model as it currently is, whether it's good or bad is immaterial. The fact is it's not working because the SABC doesn't have enough funding. I do not believe we're ever going to get enough funding from license fees. That is not the thing that will produce the funding that will make SABC profitable. What is more important is to find ways that will make it profitable, and that you get from sponsors, from advertising, from marketing. So first we've got to get the content right. So it's content that people would be willing to pay advertising fees for. Because if I, as a private sector company, want to sell my products, I want to sell it on a program or on a radio station where I know I've got a lot of listeners or viewers that's going to get the message that I'm trying to broadcast. But I believe it's also, there's other ways that we must do this. You know, the SABC has got a broader mandate to inform our public, the people of South Africa, about what's going on in the country. So there is room for those kind of engagements that is not necessarily being shown on TV or broadcast on radio, that will still allow us to get funding. And there I mean things like sponsorship, events that's happening, etc., where we can play a role as well. My funding model, in short, is to focus on getting more advertising income. That is the main focus of my turnaround strategy that I would implement when it comes to the SABC, and what I will be focusing on if I am successful.
Thank you very much, Honorable Gongbela.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Sass, I thought, having been in government in the respective roles you have played, particularly from the Treasury unit, you would have discussed the specifics you know about SABC in terms of its leadership deficits and management. And maybe you can also explain, you seem to have gone to a lot of places in a short space of time. Maybe if you can share with us that. But there's one conundrum or a complex question that South Africa is dealing with. I'll just quickly quote for you. If you go, for instance, to the core editorial values of SABC, they speak about the fact that all public broadcasters share features with line to accountability and independence. Although South African one would be unique to our democratic values articulated in the Constitution. But further, under the code of SABC, interestingly, one point says, we do not allow advertising, commercial, political, or personal consideration to influence editorial policy. And further there, it says the SABC is not the mouthpiece of government of the day, nor should it broadcast its opinion of government policies unless they relate directly to broadcasting matters. My closing quote, under Charter, it says, the role of the shareholder, because I heard you speaking about the shareholder, is to describe or articulate the roles of the directors and the board in a compact. But they say, in so doing, the shareholder must take into account potential conflicts of interest between the shareholder's regulatory responsibility as government on the one hand and the shareholder's responsibility on the other. I'm through with you.
Thank you, Member. I do not believe, Member, that it serves any purpose to name people by name and
Name issues, not people. Specific deficits.
well-
You don't have to say it was done by so and so.
if the specific issues that I think is important is the issue of 90% local content. There were issues about producing only good news, which I will speak a little bit about now because it comes back to what you were saying about the mouthpiece of the government in place. And then also there were issues about reporting under one person, centralization of power, and the sale of some of the programs. I think I've touched on most of these things during the conversation. I'm not against selling of programs, but it must be in the right context. You can't sell your crown jewels. You know, if you don't have the right assets, which include intellectual property, you're setting yourself up for failure. And there must be procedures that is being put in place so that you can value first this asset that you're going to sell and make sure that you get the right value for it. 90% local content, I'm very much in favor of local content. In fact, if you ask me, when it comes to music, our local music is the best in the world. But we have to consider what is the impact of our actions when we do take those decisions. And if you go from overnight to change from, I don't know what it was, but let's say, for example, 20% local content to 90% local content, you must understand that you're going to lose advertising space and that some people will no longer listen to you. Because whether we like it or not, people, let's say it's people that like to listen to music, they want to listen to international music as well. And it's freely available these days with the infrastructure that we have. Therefore, you will lose those advertising space. So what I'm saying is, all of these issues that's in the media, digital, analog, you know, you've got to move with the times, but all of it must be seen in context. And I'm not condemning the decision that has been taken about them. I'm condemning the way in which it happened. I think there was not proper oversight. We didn't consider it adequately, because if we have done that, the results that we got out of it would have been better. Nothing wrong with increasing local content, but you must do it over a series of time. You must build up to it. The code and the various areas that the member have quoted, very important. I believe that even if you have a shareholder, you are not necessarily the mouthpiece of that organization. The SABC can never be the mouthpiece of the ruling party, although we must understand that the ruling party does have the majority view, and therefore it would be fair that they probably, you know, when it comes to news reporting, there are more people that's interested in the governing party because they've demonstrated that by voting for the governing party, and therefore you have to report on it in a certain way. That doesn't mean that you have to report propaganda. You must report factually, and if it's not factually, that is our responsibility as board to take those action. I have no issue with the news starting off with what the president have said, but it must be put in context that this is what he has said. And it cannot be for propaganda. It cannot be to promote certain factions or anything like that. And that is our responsibility as a board. We must make sure that those policies are applied to.
Your time is up.
Thank you.
I will give follow-ups. I have 5 minutes left. I'll give Honorable Kalako and Honorable Van Dam.
No,
For the
to
5
me,
minutes.
it's just
They will share the 5 minutes.
yes. To me, Chair, it's just clarity. If I heard you when you started, Mr. Sass, when you were telling us about yourself, you mentioned that you once worked for JCI. JCI, yeah. I think you mentioned that. Around 90. My interest is that the same period when Brett Cable was heading JCI then? It was just.
The second question? No, your question.
Thanks. In my response to one of my questions, you mentioned that you do not believe the SABC should be making South Africans pay a license fee. So is it your proposal then that license fees are done away with in their entirety? And then do you pay a license fee, an SABC license fee? Thanks.
let me spend the whole 5 minutes answering the members' no, remember, yes, no, what I can say is that the time I was at JCI was just before Brett Cable came in. You will recall that at the time JCI was a big mining conglomerate like Anglo-America. They split it up into Amplats, Jonic at the time, and JCI. And then immediately after that split is when Brett Cable bought JCI, the mining portion of it. So I was there just before him. I'd never worked with him. As far as the proposal, yes, it is my proposal, but it's my personal view. If the board decide that license fees must be there, I will make sure that it's implemented and done. But my personal view is it doesn't serve purpose. In fact, I believe it's a barrier to some of our members of public when we say we want to provide content to all the people of South Africa. License fee is a barrier to some of them, and I would, my personal view is I would do away with it. As far as my own license fee is concerned, yes, I do have a TV license, but it's due. It has not been paid, you know, so I do have to pay a fine on it. My last question, in the advent of a DTT, I hope you have, in the advent of DTT, what do you think the role of SABC is as a public broadcaster? In the advent of DTT, what do you think the role of the public broadcaster is? Yeah, I must be honest, I don't know what DTT
and maybe
is.
This digital terrestrial television. Maybe just to elaborate on the question of TV licenses and stuff, because that's part of collecting revenue for SABC. But I think you said this. What do you think is the best model? What do you think is the best model as a person who's interested in being in the board?
Chair, let me start with the second one first, because as you probably heard during my discussion, it's a passion of mine. I believe very strongly in it. It's not that I'm against license fees. It's just that I don't want there to be any barriers to the population of South Africa to get access to what we have. And therefore, I believe it's a better model to rely on advertising revenue to a larger degree. You do that by having content that people want to advertise in. The more listeners or viewers that you attract, the more likely people are to pay for advertising space. So we got to increase the content of what we broadcast and the quality of what we broadcast. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to expend more money. But if we do that, I believe that in a couple of years we will get to a situation where we can do away with state subsidizing, and we would not need license fees. In the absence of that, if we have to levy license fees, then I would advocate that we have to make much more use of things like libraries, etc., to give people access to programs that we broadcast, or schools, etc., provide some content to them for free so that we know that they have access to it. In my model, I would do away with license fees completely, but it will not be something that will happen immediately. It will have to happen over time because of the situation that we're in. As far as DTT is concerned, I believe the content will remain the same. The fact that it's a different platform doesn't change the content. And at the moment, my biggest concern with the SABC is the content itself is not up to standard. The fact that it's going to be broadcast on a different platform, to me, doesn't change anything. You don't make the program in a different way because it's going to be on a different platform, I believe.
No, thanks, Mr. Sass. Here are the members. Anything to ask? I think they are ready for questions.
I don't want to spend too much time because I think in the questions that the member has asked me, they've already indicated what they expect of us. I do want it, it's maybe not a fair question to ask, but I wanted to know, because most of the members are members of the members of the portfolio committee, and of course the SABC board cannot operate without the cooperation of the portfolio committee and the support of them. And I wanted to know how the quality opportunity that the SABC board will have to come to yourself, to come to you for guidance, to say, this is what we experience. There might be involvement from the shareholder, there might be involvement from other people. Would we have the backing of the committee that will support us in those ways? And I think that's the only question that I wanted to ask, Chairperson.
Kalako?
No, thank you, Chair. Definitely, Mr. We do, as a committee, work closely, not only with the board, also work closely with the executive. We call them from time to time. We don't seek permission from the board or minister to call them. So we work with them, and we do assist where we can assist. If you as a board, you bring an issue to us, where there's a misunderstanding between you and the minister, or problem with the officials, this committee is there for that, to assist in that, work with the board. As long as we are doing the right things. Boards which we are not working with are those who do not do right things. They find problems in this committee.
Thank you very much. The experience of the board before the interim board and the experience of the interim board, you will learn from that. You know what happened to the board before the interim, and you know the position of the committee members in totality on the interim board. So we are very fair. We acknowledge work, good work, but we don't stand people who are not doing good work. And you know what we do. Thank you very much, and that's the end of it. Go well.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to the members as well for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Can we, yes, if you can excuse us, but thanks a lot.